So if you are an executive trying to figure out how your company is, going to survive the incoming wave of mandatory climate regulations, you're probably looking at high-tech carbon capture machines or like massive solar farms.
Right, that is usually the standard corporate playbook.
Exactly. But what if your company's ultimate survival loophole doesn't rely on Silicon Valley technology at all? What if it relies on cow dung, drone piloting women, and rural farmers in India?
It sounds like a stretch, but it is actually a very real strategy.
It is. And welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are unpacking a stack of pitch materials and operational blueprints for a really fascinating project in India called the Smart FPO.
And just for context, FPO stands for Farmer Producer Organization.
Right. And our mission today is to figure out how a rural farming model is quietly positioning itself as the ultimate corporate lifeline for an impending regulatory earthquake. Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with the core problem you're facing as a listener, and that is India's march toward net zero by 2070.
Yeah, and that 2070 target is the overarching goal, sure. But the immediate crisis for corporations hits much, much sooner. The true turning point here is the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme, or the CCTS.
Which is coming up fast.
Very fast. Historically, buying carbon credits has been this voluntary exercise. It was a nice-to-have initiative that looked really great in a corporate sustainability brochure. It basically proved you were a good corporate citizen.
Yeah, a PR move, essentially.
Exactly. But starting in 2026, for major industrial and commercial entities in India, the CCTS shifts from a voluntary PR move to strict mandatory compliance.
Meaning it literally becomes the law. You either possess the carbon credits to legally offset the emissions your factories are producing, or you face severe crippling penalties, like you literally cannot keep the lights on.
And why this matters so deeply to you, the listener, is the sheer unprecedented scale of what is coming down the pipeline, because you have to factor in both domestic mandates and international regulation.
Right, because it's a global economy.
Exactly. For example, Europe is implementing the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, without getting bogged down in all the regulatory alphabet soup. That essentially means Europe will aggressively tax imported goods based on their carbon footprint.
Wow. So if you are manufacturing in India and exporting globally, carbon credits just stop being a formality entirely.
They become a fundamental requirement for the very survival of your global supply chain. Analysts actually project the domestic market for these credits will surpass $400 billion by 2034.
Wait, $400 billion? That is a staggering amount of capital shifting into a completely new market.
It is a colossal shift. But hidden inside those financial projections is a really alarming, looming structural deficit.
A deficit of the credits themselves.
Yes. In the initial rollout phase, say 2026 or 2027, the market supply of carbon credits might actually be sufficient to meet the corporate demand. But as the government tightens those emission targets year over year, the well is going to run completely dry.
Because everyone is going to be scrambling to buy them at the exact same time.
Precisely. By 2030, analysts project a severe systemic shortage of high-quality carbon credits. And that scarcity could drive domestic prices up to $45 per ton.
So, if you are sitting on a corporate board, you are staring down the barrel of a massive shortage in just a few years. You can't just rely on buying credits on the open market because there simply will not be enough of them to go around.
Right, and the ones that do exist will be prohibitively expensive.
You essentially have to manufacture your own private supply of credits, and that brings us directly to the proposed solution in our source material today, which is the Smart FPO Vrindavan Village model.
This is where the narrative shifts from corporate regulatory panic to incredibly innovative grassroots engineering.
Yeah, because when I first read through the pitch, my immediate thought wasn't, oh, this is a farm. It reads much more like a corporate risk hedging portfolio.
That's a great way to put it.
Just like a hedge fund manager diversifies their investments to protect against a sudden market crash, this village model is diversifying its carbon capture. And the raw material, the feedstock for this entire operation is quite literally free agricultural waste.
And the output is what the pitch materials call green gold, meaning officially recognized carbon credits and valuable industrial goods. They're actually calling this hub a bovine biorefinery.
Bovine, of course, referring to the local cattle population.
Right, and this specific biorefinery design is engineered to process between 5 and 7 tons of organic waste every single day.
Let's actually get into the mechanics of what this hub produces, because it's kind of fascinating. It's like a Silicon Valley tech incubator got dropped into rural India. The headline product is something called Vrindavan Pram,
Which serves as a biological alternative to DAP.
Right, DAP is diammonium phosphate, one of the most widely used chemical fertilizers in the entire world. This single rural hub is projected to produce 1,600 kilograms of this biological fertilizer substitute every day.
And to understand why that generates so many carbon credits, we really have to look at the how. The production of chemical DAP is an incredibly brutal process for the environment.
Oh, it's massively polluting.
It is. It requires intensive mining for phosphate rock, reacting it with sulfuric acid, and processing it with synthetic ammonia. All of those steps require massive amounts of fossil fuels. And then you have to ship it globally.
So the footprint is huge before it even hits the soil.
Exactly. By replacing that heavy chemical industrial process with a biologically derived alternative created right there in the village, this single smart FPO hub avoids 18,000 tons of emissions annually.
18,000 tons.
Yeah, you aren't just planting a tree and hoping it captures carbon over 50 years. You are fundamentally preventing a massive amount of industrial pollution from ever occurring at the factory level.
Okay, and they're also taking that same waste and processing it into 500 liters of natural paint daily. And that alone generates another 3,500 carbon credits. But I have to stop here and push back a little on the premise.
Sure, go ahead.
Is replacing a localized amount of paint and fertilizer really enough to sustain the massive carbon ledger of a multinational corporation? Like, I mean, if I'm a steel manufacturer, a few buckets of biopaint are not going to offset my blast furnaces.
That is a highly critical point, and it's completely valid. If the pitch stopped at paint and fertilizer, this wouldn't be a $400 billion solution. What is fascinating here is how the smart FPO model anticipates that exact skepticism.
Right, they know it's not enough on its own.
They do. They don't just rely on one or two substitution products. They create a highly diversified, multi-layered carbon portfolio that extracts value from every single inch of the rural ecosystem.
They are completely stacking the deck. When you look at the breakdown in the sources, they are squeezing verifiable carbon credits out of absolutely everything. Instead of just reading the list, let's talk about how these actually work, starting with direct carbon removal.
Okay, let's do it.
So they are planting 100,000 fruit and fodder trees, which yields 8,000 credits. But more interestingly, they are using a 300 kilogram per day biochar reactor. What exactly is a biochar reactor doing to earn 2,200 credits?
This is a brilliant piece of biological engineering. Normally, after a harvest, farmers are left with tons of crop residue. If they burn it, or even if they just let it rot in the field, all that decaying plant matter releases its stored carbon and methane back into the atmosphere.
Right, which totally defeats the purpose of the plants absorbing it in the first place.
Exactly. A biochar reactor stops that process. It bakes the crop residue at incredibly high temperatures in a low oxygen environment. It's a process called pyrolysis.
So it doesn't actually burn?
No, because there isn't enough oxygen for it to actually catch fire and burn into ash. So the organic material turns into a highly stable, carbon-rich charcoal. When you mix that biochar back into the soil, it locks that carbon away for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years.
It completely removes it from the atmospheric cycle. That makes perfect sense. They're basically freezing the decomposition process.
Precisely. And they also move heavily into replacing fossil fuels.
Yeah, I saw they have a 3 tons per day compressed biogas plant, plus a centralized biogas hub. Instead of burning coal or diesel, they're capturing the methane from the decomposing waste and turning it into usable, clean burning fuel.
Which earns them another 5,500 credits.
And they also have an initiative called Vrindavan Rakshak, where they physically recycle over 100,000 plastic bottles, bringing in another 1,200 credits.
And crucially, they integrate smart, precision technology into the daily farming routines.
This was the part that genuinely surprised me. They're running a drone as a service program, like agricultural drones for precision spraying over 200 acres of farmland.
It's incredible technology for a rural setting.
It really is. By using a drone's targeted mapping, they drastically reduce the sheer volume of chemical spray that normally gets blanketed over a field. That alone generates another 500 credits.
And they're even attacking the methane problem directly at the source. And by source, I mean the cows themselves.
Right, the actual cows.
They are feeding the cattle an advanced strain of Napier grass called CO5.
Okay, you have to explain this to me. How does a specific type of grass translate into carbon credits?
It comes down to the chemistry of bovine digestion. Cows have a specialized stomach called a rumen, where microbes ferment their food. Standard, tough agricultural fodder requires a massive amount of fermentation to break down.
And the byproduct of that fermentation is methane gas, which the cow then burps out.
Exactly. And methane is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas, much more heat-trapping than carbon dioxide. The Napier grass CO5 is engineered to be highly digestible.
Oh, so it digests faster.
Right. It changes the actual flora and chemical balance inside the cow's gut. That drastically reduces the amount of fermentation required and therefore drastically reduces the methane emitted.
That is wild. So we have drones in the sky, we have chemically optimized grass in the fields, and we have household biogas units capturing methane right from the source. But the absolute best detail in this entire pitch, the thing that really highlights the wild contrast of this operation, is how they handle their heavy logistics.
It really is a striking image.
Right alongside the IoT sensors and the precision drone spraying, they are utilizing 75 professional bullet cart enterprises for their transport needs.
They are actively choosing to replace diesel-guzzling transport trucks with traditional animal-powered bullock carts.
And because they can mathematically prove how much diesel fuel they are not burning to move all this fertilizer and biomass around, that low-tech method yields a massive 3,800 carbon credits. High-tech drones mapping the fields, and traditional bullock carts hauling the cargo. It feels almost contradictory on paper.
It might seem contradictory at first glance, sure, but if we connect this back to our earlier point about corporate risk, it is masterful portfolio management.
How so?
Well, when you look at the final data provided in the pitch, the total yield for all these stacked activities is 64,300 TCO2e. That is tons of CO2 equivalent generated annually by a single hub.
That is a huge number for one village hub.
It is. And combining drones with bullock carts is a diversified approach to maximizing that yield. Think about it. If a corporation relies on just one method, say, they only buy credits from a massive tree planting operation, a single forest fire wipes out their entire multi-million-dollar compliance strategy in an afternoon.
Oh, wow. Yeah, all their credits literally go up in smoke.
Exactly. By spreading the credit generation across methane capture, biochar, recycling, and diesel reduction, they create a highly resilient, risk-mitigated asset.
Okay, so they have the environmental engineering completely locked down. 64,300 diversified credits a year, insulated against a single point of failure. Now we really have to talk about how corporate executives actually buy into this system to protect themselves from that impending 2026 mandate.
Right, the financial pitch.
Because the financial pitch outlined in these sources is aggressively optimistic.
It is definitely designed to create a sense of urgency. They're offering an early mover framework that outlines two very distinct tiers of investment.
Let's break down the math on the first one, which they call the normal investor tier. They frame the investments in multiples of 10 lakh rupees. For an international listener, that is roughly 12,000 US dollars.
A pretty accessible entry point for a mid-sized company.
Exactly. For every single unit of $12,000 invested, the corporation gets a guaranteed allocation of 1,500 carbon credits a year. According to the pitch, those 1,500 credits hold an open market value of 15 lakhs or about $18,000 annually.
And that accumulates quickly.
It does. Over the 5-year life of the project, that initial $12,000 investment yields a monetary value of about $90,000. They are advertising that as a 650% premium.
And then they offer the VIP option for major players.
The strategic anchor tier. This is for a multinational company that wants to adopt an entire smart FPO hub outright. It requires funding the total capital expenditure of 9 crore rupees, which is roughly 1.1 million US dollars spread out over 3 years.
And the reward for that level of commitment is huge.
It is. The corporate anchor receives a staggering 50% of the hub's total annual carbon credit production. Over 5 years, the pitch projects that value at over 80 crore rupees, or almost $9.6 million. That is a 792% premium on the initial $1.1 million investment.
And they also get governance control, right?
Yes. The investing company gets a dedicated seat on the hub's board of directors as an expert director, giving them direct oversight and control.
The documentation is certainly positioning this as a modern-day gold rush for early adopters.
Okay, wait, time out. A 792% return in 5 years. I have to ask the obvious question here. If those numbers were actually guaranteed, Wall Street private equity firms would have already bought up every single farming village in India.
That's a very fair point.
What is the hidden cash? How is that math even remotely possible in the real world? And what happens if the government changes the rules tomorrow?
That is exactly the level of scrutiny required here. These projections aren't pulled out of thin air, but they do rely heavily on highly favorable government policy assumptions.
Okay, what kind of assumptions?
First, the math assumes a government benchmark price of 1,000 rupees, about $12 per carbon credit. If the market price drops below that, those astronomical return percentages will shrink rapidly.
So there is market risk.
Yes. However, the risk is aggressively padded by state support. The pitch outlines that the smart FPO model qualifies for a massive 50% government capital subsidy.
Meaning the government is literally paying for half of the infrastructure build-out.
Precisely. On a standard hub, that 50% subsidy amounts to around 65 lakh rupees, or nearly $78,000. And the pitch suggests that this specific subsidy can be legally structured as a direct refund to the corporate investor.
Wait, so the company gets cash back right away?
Essentially, yes. When you factor in that massive upfront cash injection returning from the government, the payback period for the initial corporate investment drops down to just 12 to 15 months.
Okay, so the state is heavily incentivizing this, effectively de-risking the upfront capital. That actually makes the corporate math look incredibly viable. But, a massive return on investment is just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Corporations have a lot of plates spinning.
Right. Modern corporations have to manage so much more than just their balance sheets. They have complex compliance reporting, public relations, and huge human resources challenges. And our deep dive into this pitch reveals how cleverly the smart FPO targets those specific corporate pain points.
The regulatory compliance aspect alone makes this a highly attractive asset. In India, large corporations are legally mandated to spend 2% of their average net profit on corporate social responsibility, or CSR.
Right, and usually corporate HR teams scramble at the end of the fiscal year to find some recognized charity to write a check to, just to hit that mandatory 2% quota.
But an investment in a smart FPO legally qualifies as fulfilling that mandatory CSR spend.
So it solves that headache immediately.
It does. Furthermore, regulators globally are requiring companies to prove they are acting sustainably, not just making money. In India, this is tracked under SEBI's Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting Standards.
The BRSR.
Yes, because this single biorefinery project tangibly touches on environmental protection, rural poverty alleviation, and women's empowerment all at once, it becomes a silver bullet for a corporate compliance officer. It dramatically improves a company's global ESG ratings in one single stroke.
It basically checks every single box on the corporate responsibility form. But here's where it gets really interesting. This was the detail in the source material that made me literally sit back in my chair. They call it the talent transition loophole.
It is a fundamentally unique proposition for the corporate world.
We all know the tech sector and the wider corporate world go through these brutal cycles of massive layoffs. Structural workforce cuts. It's terrible for internal morale. It costs an absolute fortune in severance packages. And it is always a massive PR nightmare.
Nobody likes announcing layoffs.
Exactly. This pitch proposes that if a company is facing layoffs, instead of firing their skilled tech and managerial staff, they can officially redeploy them to run these smart FPO hubs in rural India.
You are taking highly trained urban professionals, software engineers, project managers, data analysts, and shifting them to manage drone fleets, monitor IoT sensors, and balance the carbon ledgers at a bovine biorefinery.
But let's debate the reality of this for a second. Would a 30-year-old software engineer living in a major metropolis facing a layoff actually agree to pack up and move to a rural village to manage a cow dung refinery?
It's a tough sell.
Right. It sounds brilliant on paper as an alternative to severance. You save the jobs, keep the talent, and put world-class managers in charge of your climate compliance. But the cultural shift is massive.
It is a massive shift, and realistically, it would require significant retraining and a very specific type of employee willing to make that lifestyle change. But from the corporate perspective, the PR spin is undeniably powerful.
Oh, for sure.
Instead of announcing thousands of layoffs, the company announces a strategic redeployment of its workforce to fight climate change on the front lines. It sounds heroic.
It completely flips the narrative.
And while that corporate talent provides the high-level management structure, the absolute foundation of the project relies on what the pitch calls the community prosperity loop. This brings us to the concept of permanence.
Permanence being the guarantee that the project actually lasts long enough to sequester the carbon it claims to?
Correct. In the carbon market, if the local community gets frustrated and abandons the project after 2 years, all those projected credits are rendered completely worthless.
So how does the smart FPO guarantee that the local village stays deeply invested in keeping the biorefinery running for the long haul?
By making the community incredibly wealthy relative to their baseline income. We discussed those 64,300 credits having a current market value of around 5.46 crore rupees, or roughly $650,000.
Right.
The financial model dictates that an astounding 75% of this carbon income goes directly to the 3,000 farmer members of the FPO.
That is a staggering wealth transfer straight into the rural economy.
It equates to an extra carbon bonus of 13,663 rupees per year for every single farmer member. And that is on top of the fact that transitioning to natural biofertilizers saves them an estimated 3,200 rupees an acre in input costs.
Wow. So when the local farmer's personal financial prosperity is directly tied to the carbon output of that facility, that biorefinery is never shutting down.
Exactly. That is your permanence guarantee.
And it's not just the traditional farmers seeing the benefit. There is a huge focus on social leadership through what they call the Lakhpati Didi revolution.
Lakhpati Didi essentially translates to women who are earning over a lakh of rupees, about $1,200 annually, which is a completely transformative sum in these rural areas.
The Smart FPO aims to turn 3,000 women into high-tech managers over the next 5 years. To be clear, these aren't just manual labor jobs turning compost.
Not at all.
These women, drawn from local self-help groups, are being rigorously trained to pilot the agricultural drones, monitor the soil IoT sensors, and run the day-to-day high-tech operations of the hub. It is fundamentally rewriting the social and economic structure of the village.
It completely transforms the local population from passive recipients of corporate charity into active, highly skilled partners in a multi-million-dollar industrial enterprise.
So to bring all of this together, the organization behind this pitch, Best Care, is not just talking in hypotheticals. They are actively launching a pilot phase of 5 smart FPOs across the Hindi Belt in India right now.
The timing is critical here.
It is. The call to action for corporates is pretty stark. You can invest your capital today and secure those massive early mover percentages, or you can wait 6 to 9 months for the pilot phase to complete.
But by then, the 2026 CCTS mandate will be breathing right down your neck, the desperation will be higher, and the entry price will likely be much, much steeper.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what this pitch is doing is reframing the very concept of rural India. For decades, the corporate world has viewed the rural village as a destination for philanthropy, a place to fulfill obligations with a fraction of a percent of leftover profits.
This model flips that dynamic entirely. The rural village, with its agricultural waste and its massive land footprint, becomes a high-tech partner essential for corporate survival and global climate resilience.
It completely upends the traditional power dynamic. Think back to that corporate executive we talked about at the beginning, scrambling because the rules of the global economy are changing beneath their feet.
They have to adapt or face massive penalties.
Right. As carbon rapidly becomes the most critical currency of our era, will the most powerful corporate assets of the 21st century cease to be software algorithms or massive glass skyscrapers in financial districts? Will they instead become highly engineered, drone-assisted cow dung refineries in rural villages?
This is a wild thought.
What happens to the global economy when a multi-billion-dollar multinational company's very survival depends entirely on the prosperity of a local farmer in India? Something for you to mull over the next time you see a massive corporation promise they are going net zero.